Hi, Ezra.
Hey, Byron. Welcome to Blogging Heads, where Byron, York, and I are going to go at it for a little while today.
You know, I have to say that this is the first Blogging Heads I have done since Blogging Heads became a Fortune 500 company. And the difference is incredible. You know, the swag alone, the gift bags, I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, I think we should unionize. I mean, now that there is so much money floating around to get, we need some sort of organization which will allow us to get our fair share of the loot.
Okay, you work on that over at the Prospect, okay?
Fair enough. I fear that today we're going to begin Blogging Heads with an embarrassing admission on my part. When Byron and I were planning out the topics for this week, I know he's been working on the Plame trial. I believe he's been at the Libby trial all week, in fact. And there was no way I could talk him out of making this a topic today, and that seemed right, given that it's big news. The problem is that my secret shame is that I don't know anything about the Libby trial. I think the people of Fire Dog Lake do a wonderful job, and I've been outsourcing all of my commentary or, in fact, knowledge of the issue to them, assuming, like the wannabe economist I am, that my comparative advantage is to keep digging into healthcare plans. But sadly, that means I'm pretty unarmed in this conversation.
That's a really embarrassing
but we should let Brian give us a bit of an update on where things have been going.
Yeah, it's terrible. Well, anyway, the problem is that what it looks like now is this could be the trial that does not end. As we record this, it's day 8 on Friday, and the jury actually late Thursday asked for half a day off on Friday so that they could take care of medical appointments and school appointments and various errands that they have to do on the weekdays. And the judge said sure, but everybody, including the judge, took that to mean that there's no way there's going to be a verdict on Friday, so it's going to go into Monday, which would be day 9 of negotiations. So what's going on? Most observers agree that there really haven't been any signs of disunity on the jury. It's not like they're at each other's throat when they come into the courtroom or anything like that. So some speculation has begun that, and this has happened in previous cases, that in really big cases, juries sometimes enjoy being the jury in a really big case. And we know for a fact that they are way down deep in the weeds of the CIA leak case because they asked for big pads of paper and an easel and Post-it notes and magic markers and pictures of the witnesses. So it's just try to visualize what the jury room looks now. I'm sure all the stuff is taped up on the wall and everything.
Now what are the range here? I mean, on one end they can go not guilty, but assume that things go very bad for Scooter Libby. What would he get?
Well, there are 5 counts against Libby. 2 of them are what are called Cooper counts, and 2 are Russert counts, and 1 is a combination count. The 2 Cooper and the 2 Russert counts are both either making false statements or perjury counts. They each carry a possible 5 years max, and the obstruction of justice count, which is the omnibus count, carries 10 years max. Most people think, and this includes some of the bloggers at Fire Dog Lake, think that the Cooper counts are pretty weak, or at least the weakest of the lot. The Cooper count basically is this. Libby testified that he told Cooper that reporters were telling him, Libby, about Valerie Plame Wilson, and Cooper testified that no, Libby never said that. And that's it. There are no notes to support either man's version of the story, no recordings, no other contemporaneous evidence. That's it. So those 2 counts look kind of funky, and the jury asked a question the other day about one of those Cooper counts. It almost gave people the idea that they were wondering whether it was a crime for Libby to lie to Matt Cooper, which, for the record, it isn't. And then there are the 2 Russert counts, which most people think are stronger just because of the presence of Tim Russert and some of the specificity of the things that were said. And then the obstruction count. So, look, it seems to me there's a couple of possible things. I find it hard to believe that a District of Columbia jury will acquit Libby on everything. I just find that difficult to believe. And it's always possible they could convict on a count or 2. But I think it's also possible that a juror has listened to this whole thing and says, this case is just kind of baloney. Nobody can remember his name. Everybody was gossiping about Valerie Plame Wilson. And, I just don't know why this guy, Libby, got nailed and the other ones don't, and just, throw the whole thing out. So that's the range. That would be a mistrial hung jury. That's the range of things that we could have.
Huh. Well, that is quite a range. And your personal prediction, Byron?
Well, like I said, I find it hard to believe there'd be an acquittal. I do think a hung jury is a real possibility, and I think you have to wonder what they're doing. Because, I mean, it's a complicated case, but it's not that complicated. They could have come to a decision by now if they'd wanted to. So, I don't know. It's just that you have to remember there are two cases being tried here. One is the case that the jury is deciding, and one is the case that all the bloggers and writers have been talking about, which is kind of the larger Dick Cheney and the war over the war case, which is, not what's actually at stake in the criminal trial.
Well, maybe if the jurors were reading more Fire Dog Lake, we would be getting somewhere.
Well, let's hope they're not. Although that would be very good grounds for appeal for the Libby defense team if there's a conviction.
Wasn't one of the jurors eliminated the other day? The guy who didn't wear the Valentine's Day
T-shirt? Yeah, it was a woman. It was very interesting. She was a woman. She's 70 years old. She's a retired art curator, and she worked as a curator at MoMA in New York. And there was this kind of weird scene on Valentine's Day where the jury's about to begin their negotiations, and they come out, and they're all wearing these red Valentine's Day T-shirts, except for this woman. And one of the jurors rises to speak publicly, and the judge is about to have a heart attack because they could say something that could ruin the whole trial, cause a mistrial right there. And the juror said something to the effect of, well, we're about to begin our deliberations. Our unanimity may, go no further, but we all want to wish you a happy Valentine's Day. And this woman wasn't wearing the T-shirt, and there was this thought, there was all the speculation, because that's all it is, saying, well, is this woman standoffish? Is she a dissenter? Does this show that she's not on board with the other jurors? Or my personal thought was, she's an art curator, she has some taste, and she wouldn't be caught dead in a red Valentine's Day T-shirt. So, I have no idea what it meant. But
so was she actually thrown out from the jury on grounds of not having enough jury spirit, or was there an actual reason?
No, what happens is the judge gives very strict instructions to the jury not to watch any television or read any reports about the trial, and they're supposed to steer clear of any reporting. They're not supposed to read the newspaper when they get to the jury room in the morning. The marshals give them newspapers that they've already been combed for any references to Libby, which would then be taken out. And anyway, this woman reported to the judge that she had come into contact with some sort of reporting about the case. We don't know what it was, but apparently it was enough that the judge said, you're off. So, if she was a misfit, she's gone.
Well, lucky for her. Okay, well then, let us go from this to something I do know a little bit more about, which is Al Gore on the corner all week.
Now, I want to be educated about this. This is about his home we're talking about.
Well, I would like to be, too. On the corner all week, which is a National Reviews blog where Byron does a lot of work, they have been just all a Twitter over the fact that somebody found out or reported that Al Gore's home uses, he's got a big home, he's a rich guy, does some hedge fund managing, if I'm not mistaken, uses, I think, 20 times more power than the median American home. It's bigger, it uses more light, etc., etc. This, of course, is being taken as evidence of his remarkable hypocrisy. Now, the Gore family purchases carbon offsets, which is we have, various sort of non-mandatory, but nevertheless cap and trading schemes wherein businesses can sell certain numbers of carbon and we can buy them back. And the idea is that you like with everything else, carbon is a scarce resource, and if people are buying it, it becomes more expensive and will encourage less use and so forth. So given the way the economics of these schemes work out, the Gore family's carbon footprint is actually zero because they're buying up X number of them, and so businesses and others aren't using those carbon settings, which they would otherwise be using. They're instead selling them to the Gore family. This is hypocritical, and I was hoping, I fear what you just said about being educated, I was hoping you could tell me why this is a problem, Byron, because
first of all,
I'm a little bit
I haven't
befuddled.
written anything. You can look at the corner and you will not see me writing anything. And I believe everybody got all excited when Drudge made a big deal of this. So I can't recall any specific corner references, although I'm sure there were. So let me ask you
there are many. Peter Suderman, who's actually a friend of mine, that does great movie reviews, but I think is very wrong in Al Gore, had a bunch on it. Okay. Rich Lowry had some things.
Well, let me ask you about this. First of all, it is a fact that it's a big house and it uses a lot of electricity, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And Gore, in a statement, I guess it went out on Think Progress, said something to the effect that they use a lot of, they pay more for sort of green-generated stuff, and they have these energy-saving light bulbs, and they do all these things that people can do to conserve energy. And that's right? Mm-hmm. Okay, now that part I understand. I mean, I understand that. Now this thing about purchasing energy, carbon credits, or whatever you call them, it does seem to me to be kind of a way that rich people can pay more on their electric bill, use the same amount of power, and heat their pool all year round or do whatever they want, and then kind of feel good about doing it, even though they're clearly using a lot of power, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
There isn't.
So is that hypocritical? That's the question.
I don't quite see why it is, particularly not from the other end of this, right? It is sort of a long and cherished, and to me, and in my view, often wrong idea, but in American society, the rich are able to do things, get better health care, have more of X resources than the poor. And it isn't clear to me why carbon would be any different than that. Now, I can understand why Ezra Klein, the unacceptably lefty journalist for the American Prospect, might think that's a problem, and we should begin really engaging in some good class warfare. What I don't understand is why folks on the right, the cap and trading scheme is a right, it is a DLC type, often supported by sort of right-wing folk, way of moving carbon into the market. It isn't a liberal idea here. So I don't understand why folks would believe that to be a problem. All that said, I don't believe personally, and I think it relates here, that we will ever be able to conserve our way out of global warming. Mm-hmm. I think you are either going to have enough technological innovation coming from a lot of government and private funding into renewable research and technology, or you're going to have to go through sort of the more wacky planetary engineering ideas, like blasting sulfate particles into the atmosphere above the Arctic, or putting mirrors in space, or all the rest of it. Now, I think that Gore is, to some degree, a good example of this. What we don't have, and an economist named Gar Lepo likes to point this out a lot, what we don't have in this country is an infrastructure capable of accommodating low-energy lifestyles. We do not have, fueling for cars that would be low energy. Even when we do, the fuel, not enough stations carry it. There isn't a backbone for that like there is for gasoline dissemination. We don't have a lot of the technologies for homes. They're hard to find. On and on. What you can do, if society made a commitment to it, is create much more of that infrastructure. So people from Gore to me, to you, to people who live wherever they may, have much more opportunity to build homes and drive cars and do various things that conserve energy. But as of now, if you want to live any sort of modern lifestyle, you are going to be in America. You are going to be creating a massively outsized carbon footprint.
Now wait a minute. You can do more or less. I remember reading an account on the Huffington Post where Ariana talks about going to do, I believe, a book event. She was in Los Angeles. The book event was in San Francisco, and they hop on Norman Lear's jet and do it. So, as far as energy use is concerned, you can do more, you can do less. If Gore has this really big house, and like I said, I believe the report from this, it was described as a free market think tank. I really can't vouch for the validity of the report, although by all accounts he does have a big house. If he's doing this and buying these credits, more power to him. But I do think that people who are skeptical of the whole idea are going to accuse him of hypocrisy. Although the last thing I would say about this is that one thing that does bring us together on this is the idea of energy independence, which we need for a variety of other reasons, mostly our national security, which would help solve environmental problems as well. So I'm all on for that.
I'll put on one last comment on that, too. I think the hypocrisy charge is a interesting but ultimately immaterial one, which is to say that, I don't think what Gore's doing is particularly hypocritical. You may, but it's really neither here nor there. Al Gore is either right or he is not right about global warming, and if you believe he is right, then he's doing good work promoting it. Whether or not he's hypocritical is actually nothing to do with the case he's making. Do as I say, not as I do, is in fact a perfectly good argument if what you're saying to do is the right thing.
Okay, well,
and moreover,
that's gonna cause you a lot of
the arguments on
that.
the global warming, on the hypocrisy, are coming from people, at least on the corner like Ian Murray, who have more of a skeptical case on global warming. I mean, the hypocrisy charge to me is straight character assassination. What is being attempted here is to discredit Gore's message by discrediting Al Gore. And Al Gore isn't running for anything. He's making an argument about global warming, or he isn't running for anything now. And I've done a profile on him. I don't think he's going to run for president, but we can reevaluate if he does. And even then, I don't think it would matter. But it's an attempt to discredit Gore's argument on global warming by discrediting Al Gore. And that would seem to me to be a really, not only uncharitable, but unuseful way to approach this issue. There's a perfectly good, or maybe not, but you can take issue with what he's arguing for. But to take issue with him is, I feel it's an unserious way to treat global warming.
Well, it's a classic political way to deal with it. So, Gore is a political figure, and of course he's going to be subject to this kind of stuff.
Sure.
Now, I'm going to let you start off again on this next issue, which is this workers joining unions issue, this so-called employee free choice thing.
Indeed. All right. The Employee Free Choice Act, which passed the House of Congress yesterday with 241 votes, a pretty heavy majority right there. Basically, what's at issue here is something called card check legislation. Right now, if you're in a union and you want to, if you want to create a union, you have to go through something called a National Labor Relations Board election, which is a type of certification process which is very long, very drawn out, and very, 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 very vulnerable to employer manipulation. Among the things that are allowed in a National Labor Relations Board election are captive one-on-one meetings in which the employer can intimidate and threaten to close a plant, or he can't threaten to close a plant. He can explain how it sure would be a shame if this plant had to close because you guys joined a union, etc. Moreover, it is simply a very long, drawn-out, and very public process, which is heavily abused. The actual penalties for employers who break the law during a union-busting drive, who fire union employees or fire union supporters, who fire union organizers, who use promotions or scheduling or various other incentives to separate folks out from the pack, are very, very low. It's a very good business investment to fire a union supporter. And it teaches a lesson to all the other ones, and he's gone, and you pay $5,000 down the road, and you don't have a union anymore, or you never will have a union. Card check goes a different way. Essentially, what will happen is the union will go around, and it'll have everybody sign a card, and if 50 plus 1% of the people sign a little card saying, hey, my name's Bob, I work here, I want a union, they got a union. It's a much harder process for employers to manipulate. For that reason, of course, and it is very good for union organizers. A lot of unions right now have been organizing to force card check elections. The employers don't have to have them. But, I think this happened with Singular, if I'm not mistaken, where enough organizing was done that Singular promised to allow a card check unionization process and remain neutral during it.
Now, in the past, they had to do the card thing, but if they got a certain number of cards, then they could force an actual secret ballot election. And those are the two words you've left out of this, right? Secret ballot election.
You can still do that in the legislation. If you went to 30%, you force a secret ballot election. Mm-hmm. If 30% of workers want a secret ballot, you have one.
But if you get to 50% or 50.1%,
right,
then you just have the union.
Right.
Now,
then you just have
what is it about a secret ballot election that you find objectionable?
Exactly what I was talking about. Workplaces are not a democracy. You are never going to have a fair vote in them, not given the amount of control and power employers are able to exert over employees. And that isn't a weird thing. If you think about it economically, the incentives for the employer are always, always, always to deny the union, and they will do what is necessary to make that happen.
Yeah,
so I don't have a problem
like
with the actual functionality of the secret ballot. But what is important here is the effect of it. Given the way the secret ballot elections are working, given the way they've been set up, given the way they end up being essentially rigged, it makes it much harder for the unions to ever organize. I'm sorry, Byron, I didn't hear that.
How is the secret ballot election rigged?
Exactly what I was talking about earlier. Given the amount of time offered, given the low penalties for what employers can do to workers, given the opportunities and vulnerability for employer intimidation, there's no way to. I mean, it's almost impossible to win in the contemporary age. About
So employers can't
80%
intimidate all these
80%
people who are
of
signing
workers,
cards?
about 80% of employers actually hire union-busting consultants during an organizing.
But
drive.
employers
very high.
can't intimidate all these people who are actually signing cards?
It's much harder because they don't know they're signing the cards. I mean,
What do you mean
the
they don't know they're
employers,
signing the cards?
card check is actually a secret election in a way that the other one isn't. They don't. They
Wait a
may
minute,
not
are you
know
saying
that
the secret
card check-
ballots are
My
not
understanding is
secret?
they may not know what's going
Wait,
on.
did you just say the secret ballots are not secret?
I'm saying that the secret ballots may be secret, but the election is public.
Yeah.
In a card check election, it isn't that way. Employers don't have the ability necessarily to know that their workers are trying to unionize and then to bring them into captive meetings, threaten to close the plant, fire a couple of them. That is where the changeover comes.
Are you
That's where the
are you a
difference
member of
is.
a union?
I'm
Are
sorry?
you a member of a union?
I am not a
Have you ever been one?
I have not.
Okay. I am, actually. I'm an inactive member of AFTRA, the American Federation of Television and Radio, something or the other. When I worked in television, I was part of it. And, you know, so I'm kind of familiar with the way at least that union operated, some other unions in that business operated. And it seems to me I cannot get past the idea that a secret election is the way that we do things in this country, not only politically. I think George Will had a very good line about this, which is that every member of Congress who was elected in a secret ballot election should oppose this legislation.
But that's crazy because
What's
right,
crazy
the
about it?
members of Congress don't do things in secret ballot elections. They all vote publicly. I mean, we've gotten to this
No, they got
line that
elected
we do
by
everything
secret ballot.
in secret, but
They
we
got
don't.
elected that way. We have secret ballot elections. That's how we elect our representatives.
But that isn't how we decide things. I mean, it is in
Yes,
fact
it is.
how we elect our members. And maybe when we elect the shop steward of the union, we should have a secret ballot election. But we recognize that, in fact,
Why should shop steward of the union have a secret ballot election? I mean, if these things are just so ripe for
so
intimidation?
why doesn't Congress work on a secret ballot system either?
Huh?
Why doesn't Congress work on a
Because
secret
they're
ballot
elected
system?
representatives doing the public's business.
Mm-hmm.
And the election itself, they are elected by the people. The secret ballot is the privilege of the voters, the people. And it seems to me that that's what should be at the unions as well, at the companies as well.
But this is exactly the case here. I mean, what I am not hearing from you at any point is any concern or even any way of accounting for the fact that in a union drive, in 51% of them, a union supporter gets fired. In X number, in I think it's 48% of them, various rules are changed to promote union opposers. On and on and on. I'm not hearing any concern. These are elections now. We do have secret ballots, but what we have in America, which makes our ballots good, Cuba has secret ballot elections too. They're not good. What we have in America is that there's a lack of intimidation. And in employer union elections, there is an absolute excess of intimidation. So what I want to hear from you, Byron, isn't so much a defense of voting procedures, but how do you erase the intimidation? How do you make not a secret ballot election, but sure, if you want one, fine. How do you make a fair election?
Well, the issue here is the secret ballot, because that's the thing that this employee free choice thing is about. So all I have to do is defend the secret ballot.
Why do they want to erase the secret ballot, Byron? I mean, that's not what it's about. The card check
the reason
procedure
the unions
is a
want
way
to
to
do this
erase
is because
employer
the percentage
intimidation.
of unionized employees in the country has been going down and down and down. We all know that from the 1950s.
But why is it going down so much, right?
Because unions have less to offer employees these days, and some of the most heavily unionized industries, like the automobile industry, are dying in part because of commitments made to unions over the years.
Or is it because when workers actually tried to unionize at Walmart and they organized the butcher shop in it, Walmart actually closed down the store.
Right.
They won't let anybody unionize. It isn't. I mean, polls show, Byron, that more than 50% of Americans want to join a union, would if they were offered it. The fact of the matter is, employees have, again, rigged the system. If somebody gets fired during your unionizing
I'll
drive,
give you a little more.
Is it likely you're going to keep with it?
I'll give you a little more of my personal experience. When I started at CNN, CNN in Atlanta was and is not unionized, and there were various efforts to start a union, and people would try to convince us lowest downs, to sign up and to support this union. And the company would basically say, forget it, If you do this, you'll only be able to edit videotape, or you'll only be able to operate a camera. You won't be able to write, or you won't be able to do all the stuff and learn all the stuff that that we offer you here. And but the bigger thing was this widespread belief. I don't know if it's true. Widespread belief that Ted Turner, would shut the place down if it went union. And there was an absolute belief among all of us that that would happen. And so the union never made it. Other parts of CNN and other parts of the country are unionized, but it never, ever made it. And I did not support it myself.
So we appear to agree.
So I went. No, I don't think it's a good idea that it should have been unionized, even to this day.
No, I understand that. But what killed the union there was, in fact, whether or not it was ever explicitly voiced, was a form of employer intimidation. It is actually illegal for an employer to shut down a shop because it unionizes. It contravenes the right to organize. So that is what killed it. And as you sort of suggested right there.
But I think it was the right thing. What can I say? I opposed the union at that time.
It's an illegal thing.
And when I later went into a shop that actually had unions, I've been very ambivalent about them, because they did bring precisely the sort of non-productive divisions that everybody knows they do. So
I don't know about that, but I think that you helpfully clarify the point here. In the end, this isn't about voting procedures, and I agree with this, by the way. It isn't about voting procedures, and it isn't about one ballot process versus another. It is whether it is, as Thomas Hagen put it in his wonderful book, which side are you on? Which side are you on? And you can be on the side of the unions, as I am. You can be against them, as you are. But the end question here isn't. The whole point of secret ballots from all these people who have never, ever, ever given a moment unprompted thought to the fact that these elections are completely rigged and employer intimidation is actually illegal but done all the time, who have never given a thought to the fact that these are not fair elections, are suddenly very, very concerned about voting procedures, because what cardship will do is create more union members. I'm for that, you're not, and that is in fact what the dividing line does.
If this is not about voting procedures, why are they changing the law about voting procedures? It's absolutely about voting procedures, and that's all it is about.
No, but I'm talking in a large way. Yes, it will change the law on voting procedures, but what it's doing is...
This is not about voting procedures. Why are they changing voting procedures?
No, but what I'm saying is a little different, Byron. It is, of course, in a technical sense about voting procedures.
Not just in a technical sense,
the corporations are fighting this law, and unions are supporting it, as you said earlier, because it will increase union density. It is about voting procedures, and that's what it will change, but the real fight here is whether or not you want it to be easier for unions to organize or not.
I don't see any reason to change the principle of secret ballot, and I wouldn't be for it if I were in a unionizing industry, and I'm not for it now. So
I'm curious. So are you for strengthening? Take away secret ballot for a minute. Let's say we're not. Let's say we keep secret ballots somehow. But are you for heavily strengthening the laws so employers have to pay, say, $500,000 if they fire a union supporter during an organizing drive? Are you for increasing the law? So, are you for increasing the law to shackle the employer away from intimidation?
Well, what is the current law on firing employees?
I believe it's $5,000 after an NLRB appeal. I could be wrong in that.
And how was that?
But I believe it's $5,000.
How was that
which
enforced?
Is a very good business decision.
Has that been enforced much over the Clinton years and the Bush years? Has there been much
difference?
Yes,
it's perfectly well enforced, but it is a very good investment to spend $5,000 to fire a union supporter so you don't have a union. It's simply a cost of doing business. It's a perfectly sound decision.
So, in other words, your preferred law would be to keep the secret ballots, but increase the fines that businesses pay for firing union supporters?
No, I'm asking you because you have a real hang-up on the secret ballot.
I do. It's a big hang-up.
Given that you're saying this is about voting procedures, and given that I'm trying to figure out if you actually care about the fair elections element of it, if you would be for that, keep the secret ballot. Can we raise it up to $500,000 or more? Can we make it essentially impossible for employers to threaten to close down plants,
to fire union supporters, etc.? I can't tell you whether we should raise it to $500,000 or $1 million. I can't say one way or the other. I have to tell you, I don't know how many union supporters are fired in the course of a year. I don't know if they're being fired as a result of other factors as well. I just can't tell you. Okay.
Well, I think that's. Shows where we are. We should move on, though, because we spent a lot of time on this. The next one is Afghanistan, and I will let you start that off.
Well, I think that I'm probably starting it off because I wrote a brief item in the corner this week after the attack on the American base where Vice President Cheney was staying. suicide attack. There were reports that the Taliban has taken credit for this. Now, I think we should take maybe some of that with a grain of salt, that the Taliban is not one completely unitary organization. But my feeling was, why aren't we launching a very, very big attack on the Taliban, given the fact that they have just attempted to assassinate the Vice President of the United States? I remember back in the Clinton years, Bill Clinton launched an attack on Iraq when he found out they were planning an assassination attempt on a former president of the United States, George H.W. Bush. So, I have to feel that we should be doing some very, very big hitting of Taliban facilities in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, if that's what it requires, because we do have reports that the Taliban has been building up camps, or Al-Qaeda has been building up camps in these areas. If they're physical facilities, I don't know why we're not destroying all of them immediately.
Well, I would suggest that the answer to that is easier than, is closer at hand than you might be saying, sorry for the redundancy. Our forces are tied up in Iraq. That's why we're not doing it. We are otherwise occupied in a deteriorating, chaotic civil war over there.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Afghanistan, like it has for years now, has really taken the back seat.
Well, this attack that I talked about doesn't necessarily have to be a ground attack. We could
apply
heavy air power to it. This may be impractical but it seems to me that you cannot have a foreign organization, especially one with whom we're at war, try to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and not really kick some ass. It's beyond understanding to me why that hadn't taken place.
I'm not necessarily against your opinion here. I am happy to do renewed offenses against the Taliban if I thought it would do some good for Afghanistan itself. But what strikes me about your comment here is that, as you say, we are at war with them. Whether or not they attack foreign visiting dignitaries, I assume that's what we expect people who we're at war with to do. The question is how much, what we've done as some sort of tacit or explicit understanding has begun to ratchet down that war, begun to cede portions of Afghanistan back to the Taliban to simply give up on it. And it would seem to me that given, that is the real issue here. This is part and parcel of what appears to be an ongoing strategy to basically, wash our hands of Afghanistan. I don't know why we're doing
Cheney was in Afghanistan. It's not part of the strategy to wash our hands. The Vice President was physically there, so I think that's prima facie evidence that we're not washing our hands of the place.
Is it? To go and do a visit to the troops. I also wonder how much going to Afghanistan to go and get some photos with the troops wasn't a way of, what wasn't a surrogate for actually going to Iraq, but which you can't do because it is too dangerous. The question for me isn't whether somebody does a drop in there to hype morale and get some good press, but whether or not we are actually committing troops, money, cash, etc., to rebuilding that country. And it seemed to me that maybe it was an impossible attempt from the start, and we should have, as I believe Michael Scheuer, the former CIA head of the Obama task force, believed, just have gone in, wrecked the place, taken out the Taliban, and then left and let them figure it out. But this doesn't seem to me to be a particularly... the fact that Cheney was there, it can have a lot of reasons behind it, but I think the evidence on the ground, given how many troops we have there, given the emphasis we're putting into it, given the fact that we have ceded parts of that country back to the people we defeated, I would say the evidence there suggests that we are, in fact, backing off pretty significantly from the Taliban.
Well, look, I know that you and others want to use my position as a way to criticize the war in Iraq, but I think we do agree that that we should be hitting places in Afghanistan and in Pakistan much harder.
I don't know about. I don't think I agree that we should be bombing Pakistan, but.
Well, I'm not saying we need to bomb Pakistan, but we need to. Maybe we could re-enlist Richard Armitage to go over there and kind of work his magic with Musharraf as he did after September 11th. Clearly we need as much flexibility as we can to kill terrorists in Pakistan. Now,
I'm all for increased diplomacy. I am, after all, liberal.
Well, I always, as the conservatives say, you worry that we'll become mired in diplomacy.
Right.
All right, now the last point we have to talk about is something that you have written about think tanks.
Okay.
And what's that?
Hold on, so I'm just writing down the timing on this. The last point we have to talk about is think tanks. Last week, the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a large foundation, gave a social mobility grant, a large social mobility grant. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal, and it was $2.2 million to create a consensus force on, or a consensus task force and position on the level and whether or not there's been a decline in social mobility in America. And Pew was very excited, and this was announced heavily, and it was going to be a bipartisan thing. So what we're going to do is get the left and the right together. And so they gave some of the money, and they gave the money to 4 different think tanks to draw researchers from each one. Now, they gave it to 2 conservative think tanks, Heritage and AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, and 2 liberal think tanks, Urban and Brookings.
Right.
What struck me about that is that Brookings and Urban are not liberal think tanks. In fact, Brookings is they are associated with liberalism, and in fact, they are a sort of part of historical, sort of managerial, technocratic liberalism, maybe. Although Brookings employs many, many scholars from the last 2 Bush administrations and even the Reagan administration, and various Republican representatives and conservative scholars, and is proud of that fact, and trumpets it in their Guide to the Experts book that I have for what I need to call Brookings people. Urban is more liberal than Brookings, without a doubt, but they are also not a very liberal think tank. And both Urban and Brookings, if you go to their mission statement, never say anything about progressivism, never say anything about liberalism, never say anything about Democrats. Both say they are non-profit, they are independent, they are empirical. I mean, they make a real show of not being part of the political wars. Now, you could have given that money to Heritage and an AEI, who are both on their mission statements. Heritage actually says, I believe, conservatism, and AEI says they're nonpartisan, but they're there to promote free markets, personal responsibility, and a variety of other sort of long-standing conservative values. You could have given that money to the Center for American Progress, which is more traditionally liberal, or EPI, the Economic Policy Institute, which is an explicitly labor liberal organization. But you didn't. And what occurred to me about this was that liberals end up in these sorts of issues at a real disadvantage, because Brookings and Urban suck up a lot of the oxygen so far as think tanks go, and they're associated with not Democrats, but they're a little bit center-left. Now, I actually agree on that. But they are the 2 big ones on the left. See, what you don't have are real left think tanks getting that attention. But on the right, you do have the 2 majorly respected right-wing think tanks, or respected on the right, Heritage and AI. There's no question what they do or why they're doing it. And it seems to me to be a structural disadvantage for the left.
Okay, so you think there's an imbalance between these far-right think tanks and these center-left think tanks. So it's kind of tilted
Which isn't
toward
to
the
say
right.
they don't all have their roles, but...
All right, well, and let me. The only thing I would say in response to your point comes from something I wrote about in my book, The Vast Left-Wing Conspiracy, available on Amazon.
And for so cheap.
And that is the difference between 501c3s and 501c4s. And in case our viewers don't follow this stuff, a 501c3 is a charity, kind of a pure charity. It's tax exempt, and if you contribute money to them, you can deduct it from your taxes. 501c4 is for organizations that are, and the trade-off for the 501c3 is that they can't engage in overt partisan politics. And the 501c4 is also tax exempt, but you can't deduct your contributions to them, but they're allowed to engage in actual partisan politics. And the reason I say this is, I remember checking with them for the book. Brookings, I believe, is a pure C3. You call them up and say, "What are you?" And they say, "Well, we're a C3. We're completely nonpartisan." You call AEI or Heritage, and they're C3s. Now, you go to the Center for American Progress, which has really gained a lot of stature since it was founded, I guess, in 2003. And it has a C3 component, the Center for American Progress, but it also has its C4 arm. It's a very overtly political organization, and if you go and look at the Progress Report or Think Progress or things like that, they actually decided, I believe, as the 2004 election was approaching, that they needed to set up a C4 to do the kind of, frankly, political stuff that they're doing. So it seems to me that, I understand your point about everybody at Brookings being so nice and centrist and everybody at AEI being so far out on the right. But it seems to me there's another difference here, which is the difference between a think tank, sort of a purer think tank, and a think tank that's involved in openly partisan politics, as the Center for American Progress is.
I have to disagree with you here. I mean, Heritage and AEI are very explicitly partisan. They don't have, you're right, they don't have the progress report or the action fund. But in fact, the Center for American Progress, in their think tank, I mean, the fact that there is an action fund within the sort of larger CAP brand seems somewhat neither here nor there. The actual Center for American Progress think tank is structured in exactly the
well,
same way.
Well, what if there was an office of the RNC,
was in fact,
in a
based
room
off
to
of
the
Heritage
side
and
of
AEI's
AEI?
examples?
Wouldn't that mean something?
I'm sorry, I didn't
I said,
hear
what
that
if there were an office of the Republican National Committee? It was separate, but, in the offices of AEI, but it was totally separate.
I think a lot of us would
difference?
argue, Byron, that Heritage is essentially an office of the National Republican
Well,
Party,
that's your
which
opinion.
is fine. You can argue that various people at Heritage or AEI do good work. I would argue that many people at CAP do good work, but that is exactly the question. I mean, I feel like you're moving this on to somewhat different ground. Yes, CAP has a political action fund. I don't think the EPI doesn't. I'm sorry.
I can't speak about them. I must say I don't know.
But so fine. I mean, this, you can have the criticism of CAP, but then replace CAP with CEPR. I mean, I think CAP does good work. Larry Korb is a very serious guy. I mean, Melody Barnes is a serious person. John Podesta is a serious person. So I think they're much better than a lot of the people at Heritage and AI. But I don't want the conversation to get diverted on that ground. So put in, CPR where Dean Baker works and
in that case, it'd be fine.
And make the same point. I mean, so let's put it this way. Do you disagree that Heritage and AI are proportionally more far right than Urban and Brookings are far left? Or do you disagree with that?
I would disagree with that. Listen, first of all, the Pew Foundation can do whatever it wants to with its money, and I think they made a perfectly reasonable decision in doing this. On the other hand, if they'd also wanted to give money to EPI or some other organization, especially if it was not didn't have an overtly political arm like the Center for American Progress does, then that would be fine too. I mean, this is not something I'm terribly passionate about. I think that they could have spread their money out differently, but that the way that they did it was perfectly fair.
I think I agree that it's fair. They can do whatever they want. I mean, they could give. They literally could do however they wanted. What fascinated me about it wasn't that it was somehow unfair, but that to them what they were doing was creating a balanced panel here. And I think that there is a historical belief that Urban and particularly Brookings is liberal when nowadays they're essentially centrist. They're part of the DC establishment in a very significant way. I mean, Brookings as well. I mean, Urban as well as one of their VPs has some Republican administration officials, or so one of my commenters argued or mentioned. And I think that it creates an interesting structural effect for the left when people who mean to be funding left organizations, particularly older, more established folks, are going to fund Brookings and Urban, where on the right they're going to fund Heritage and AI, and places like EPI, CPR, CAP, although CAP has not had a problem fundraising, as you document in your book, I assume, because you have George Soros there on the title.
He gave some money.
I think that is a fascinating difference in the way the two can. What you have happening is money going to Brookings and Urban to fund empirical research rather than to fund idea generation on the left. When that same money that is earmarked for, among say Pew, the same purpose, is going to Heritage and AI and actually does fund idea generation on what we would both consider the right.
Well, all I will say is that I think that what's going on here is basically a progressive complaint about liberals. I mean, it's like it doesn't have anything to do with the right. I mean, there are progressive organizations that are either resentful or unhappy that organizations like Brookings get a lot of money, and so this is it seems to me it's kind of completely a fight on the left team between the progressives and the liberals, and I don't care that much about it. I have to say, but here again, like I said, it does not strike me as imbalanced that you would have Heritage and AEI on one side and Brookings and Urban on the other side. That does not strike me as a terrible decision.
Well, it seems, I mean, even given the premises you've granted here, that would create a center left to actual right consensus rather than a left right consensus, which is ostensibly what Pew was going for. I'd also say you're correct. This is not Heritage and AI's fault. If anything, they've done a good job. It's an interesting relic of a time when liberalism was dominant, and various institutions of it have become sort of more in the middle. And I'm part of the sort of new progressive left, and I find it fascinating how it's still taking a long time for folks to update to those realities. And I'm not suggesting it is an immoral action on Pew's part or the fault of the right, or it's not even a fight among the left. I think it is an interesting dynamic, though, which has actual effects within the progressive movement.
All right.
I
believe that's the end of our list of topics, right?
All right. Well, thank you very much,
Hey,
Byron.
good to be here, and we'll talk again.
Definitely.
Bye-bye.